Understanding and recognizing all forms of abuse. Abuse is a pervasive issue that affects millions of people worldwide, often in ways that are subtle, insidious, or deeply normalized within relationships or environments. One of the most challenging aspects of abuse is that those experiencing it may not recognize it as such, either because it's masked as love, discipline, or societal norms, or because it erodes their sense of self over time. This article explores the various forms of abuse: physical, emotional, psychological, sexual, financial, digital, and neglect, and provides guidance on how to identify them, even when they're obscured from the victim's perspective. 1. Physical abuse. What it is. Physical abuse involves the use of force to cause harm, pain, or injury. This includes hitting, slapping, punching, choking, pushing, or using weapons. It can also extend to denying someone medical care or forcing them to consume substances. How to recognize it. Visible signs: unexplained bruises, cuts, burns, or fractures. Behavioral clues: flinching at sudden movements, wearing concealing clothing, e.g., long sleeves in warm weather, or avoiding certain topics. From the victim's vantage point, you might rationalize it as "they didn't mean it," or "I provoked them." The abuser may apologize profusely afterward, creating a cycle of guilt and forgiveness that obscures the reality. Why it's hard to see. Victims may feel shame, fear retaliation, or believe the abuse is a one-off incident rather than a pattern. 2. Emotional abuse. What it is. Emotional abuse targets a person's feelings, self-esteem, and sense of worth. It includes constant criticism, humiliation, gaslighting, making someone doubt their reality, or withholding affection as punishment. How to recognize it. Signs: low self-esteem, anxiety, depression, or a sense of walking on eggshells around the abuser. Behavioral clues: the victim may apologize excessively or seem overly eager to please. From the victim's vantage point, you might think they're just stressed, or "I'm too sensitive." The abuser's words may echo in your head, convincing you that you're the problem. Why it's hard to see. Emotional abuse is invisible. No bruises, no scars, and often masquerades as tough love or honesty. 3. Psychological abuse. What it is. Closely related to emotional abuse, psychological abuse manipulates a person's mind through intimidation, threats, isolation, or mind games. It aims to control and destabilize the victim. How to recognize it. Signs: paranoia, confusion, or fear of making decisions without the abuser's approval. Behavioral clues: the victim may withdraw from friends or family or seem unusually dependent on the abuser. From the victim's vantage point, you might feel trapped but unable to pinpoint why or believe the abuser's threats, e.g., "You'll never survive without me." Why it's hard to see. The manipulation is gradual, eroding confidence and autonomy until the victim feels they deserve it. 4. Sexual abuse. What it is. Sexual abuse involves any unwanted sexual activity, including coercion, assault, or exploitation. It can occur in relationships where consent is assumed or pressured. How to recognize it. Signs: physical discomfort, STDs, or trauma responses like aversion to touch. Behavioral clues: secrecy, shame, or sudden changes in sexual behavior. From the victim's vantage point, you might think, "I owe them this," or saying no isn't an option. In relationships, it's often dismissed as a misunderstanding. Why it's hard to see. Cultural myths about consent, e.g., partners can't say no, and fear of judgment keep victims silent. 5. Financial abuse. What it is. Financial abuse occurs when someone controls or exploits another's money or resources. This includes withholding funds, stealing, or preventing someone from working. How to recognize it. Signs: lack of access to bank accounts, unexplained debt, or inability to buy necessities. Behavioral clues: the victim may seem overly reliant on the abuser for financial decisions. From the victim's vantage point, you might feel grateful for their help managing money or believe you're bad with finances. Why it's hard to see. It's often framed as care or responsibility, especially in familial or romantic relationships. 6. Digital abuse. What it is. Digital abuse involves using technology to harass, stalk, or control someone. Examples include monitoring texts, demanding passwords, or spreading humiliating content online. How to recognize it. Signs: constant notifications from the abuser, fear of posting online, or evidence of surveillance. Behavioral clues: the victim may avoid using devices or seem anxious about their digital presence. From the victim's vantage point, you might think they just want to stay connected, or it's normal to share everything. Why it's hard to see. Technology blurs boundaries, and abusers exploit this to normalize invasive behavior. Neglect what it is. Neglect is the failure to provide necessary care, support, or attention, often in caregiving roles, e.g., parents, partners, or guardians. It can be physical, e.g., not providing food, or emotional, e.g., ignoring someone's needs. How to recognize it. Signs: malnutrition, untreated health issues, or emotional withdrawal. Behavioral clues: the victim may seem resigned or overly self-reliant. From the victim's vantage point, you might think, they're too busy, or I don't deserve more. Why it's hard to see. Neglect is an absence rather than an action, making it feel like a personal failing rather than abuse. The invisible lens. Why victims struggle to see abuse. Abuse often thrives in the shadows of denial, fear, and conditioning. Victims may normalize it. This is just how they are, or everyone goes through this. Blame themselves. Abusers shift responsibility, convincing victims they're at fault. Fear consequences. Leaving might mean losing stability, love, or safety. Lack perspective. Without a healthy baseline, abusive dynamics feel standard. The cycle of abuse, tension, incident, reconciliation, calm, further distorts reality as moments of kindness or remorse from the abuser create hope that things will change. How to break the blind spot. If you suspect you or someone else might be experiencing abuse, trust your instincts. Feeling unsafe, diminished, or controlled isn't normal, even if you can't name it. Look for patterns. Isolated incidents might be explained away, but repetition reveals intent. Seek an outside perspective. Friends, family, or professionals can reflect what you might not see. Document evidence. Keep a record of incidents, texts, injuries, or threats to counter gaslighting. Educate yourself. Understanding abuse empowers you to label it and act. Final thoughts. Recognizing abuse is the first step toward breaking free, but it's rarely easy. Victims are often caught in a web of loyalty, shame, or survival, unable to see the full picture. By shedding light on all its forms, physical, emotional, psychological, sexual, financial, digital, and neglect, we can begin to dismantle the illusions that keep people trapped. If something feels wrong, it's worth questioning, because no one deserves to live in the shadow of abuse. If you or someone you know needs help, resources like hotlines, e.g., the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233, or local support services can provide a lifeline. You're not alone, even when it feels that way. By Scott Young, aka Sinfamous Gamer.